But what's wrong with Bama squeaking by South Carolina, um, Ohio State? They got the L out in Oregon. I don't think we've touched on it much, but I'm not sure Ryan Day's the guy for Ohio State.
Wow, you know what? I believe he is the guy. Now, the reason why I thought he was going to get it back together this year was because he didn't have Jim Harbaugh to worry about, and all of that team that left from Michigan. Some of the key players did come back, but they lost a lot of key players. So it was fair to believe, without really having a quarterback coming back, Will Howard coming in, or Will Howard playing for Ohio State. I didn't think much of him, but he started stepping up a little bit. Bonehead decision this last game. But I think that he has the team at least to win the Big Ten. But was I really thinking about when the Oregon game came around? I'm still thinking Pac-12. So when Michigan was down, I'm thinking, okay, he shouldn't have any problem with the Big Ten this year, forgetting kind of like, hey, the Pac-12 has some of its biggest teams coming over to the Big Ten now, so there still may be some problem. Well, this past weekend, we got to see that problem. But you know what, though? They went up to Eugene, and it was a back and forth. So what people might have thought about Ohio State's defense probably need to rethink what they were thinking about their defense. The offense is good. Oregon, definitely not that finesse team they've been all along, but are they? Because offensively, they did score, and their defense did give up yards. But when it was said and done, they're now the number 2 team in the country, and rightfully so.
Yeah, I just have my doubts about Ryan Day. His teams haven't fared well against other top teams when they've matched up. It seems like they always come on the short end, and he's gonna have to prove it. Like I said, right now I have doubts. I'm not an Ohio State fan. I don't watch them that closely, but it just seems every time there's a big game, they come out on the short end of the stick. So that's why I don't think Ryan Day's the guy. Now, as far as that last play, you had sent me a message asking me how much Howard was paid to run it instead of throwing it to the sideline. I can't answer that. I don't know what he was thinking. I really have no idea because that guy did have a couple yards on his defender, so it would have been smart to throw the ball to the sideline, have him get out of bounds, and then kick the field goal. I don't know. I thought he thought he can get down before the clock expired.
You have that extra timeout because I think they were waiting for that to get the field goal, get a field goal range. He decides he wants to take extra steps. That ego, I guess, pushing him out there. Competitive spirit, ego, maybe they both intertwined, and that's why he did what he had done. But either way, and in college, even in the pros, when you start the slide, that's when the clock should stop. That's when you're giving yourself up, and the clock is supposed to stop. The play is over. I hear some people in these chats, not that they know the rules, some of them may, some of them don't, and the way they're speaking, it seems like they don't. They're talking about his knee didn't touch the ground. No, once you start the slide, at least in college and pro, the play is supposed to end. You've given yourself up. That's why where you end up after the slide isn't where the ball is spotted. The ball is spotted a little further back because they go where the slide started. And it's typically when the knee is not hitting the ground. But anyways, Ohio State loses the game 31-32 or 31-30. 1 point, either way you look at it, that field goal would have been a deciding factor. And Ohio State, still a good team, but Oregon, probably better than I was expecting. Dylan Gabriel playing a lot better than I expected. All of it works out. Number 2 and a legitimate number 2. But let's give credit to who the legitimate number 1 is, and that's Texas. They probably, looking in hindsight, always 2020, should not have never been dropped from number 1 all year long anyway. I mean, Georgia was there, but then when Texas did get to number 1, they should not have been dropped from number 1. They're the only consistent team we have in college football right now, and they beat the team they're supposed to beat. They beat down the teams they're supposed to beat, and they've just been churning along the entire season. At number 1, they should stay until further notice, and that notice is a loss. Not even a close game, but a loss.
Right. You talk about handling business. They spanked Oklahoma.
Oh, my God.
And, they said that sends a message. Usually that's an all-out brawl. Even when the teams aren't that closely matched, the lesser talented team finds a way to keep it close, sometimes even wins. Not the case on Saturday. Texas was having none of that.
Yeah, and Texas wasn't having it. And when you're talking about the talent and the discrepancy, all year long, I don't believe Oklahoma was as good as people has been saying. And then now you come into this game against a juggernaut of a team. And if you're talking about juggernauts right now for today's standards, it is Texas. And Texas has been the one consistent team in college football so far this year. And as the number one team, they continue to prove it. But with this game, I don't know. Vegas had a huge line on that. I thought it would hit that huge line or better. I wasn't one of these people, because typically I am, thinking that the element of the rivalry is the reason why it would be closer than what it would be or should be. Because I remember years ago with other real huge rivalries, Alabama, Auburn. I remember the year Alabama won the national championship in '92. Auburn ended the season 5-5-1. Pat Dye's last season, and Alabama just won 17-0. They end up blowing out Miami 34-13 in the Sugar Bowl, winning the national championship. You wonder, okay, that element of the rivalry is legitimate. It's real. This game, I'm expecting Texas to really beat them, only because Oklahoma has had too many close calls, and they lost a game going into this game. And Quinn Ewers coming back, I thought more points would have been scored, but they weren't. He only had 199 passing yards, one touchdown and an interception. And it all came down to the running game, I guess, and the defense. Travion Wisner just had 118 yards, but he was averaging 9.1 yards a rush and 5 sacks against that offense. But when you look at what they had with that offense, a true freshman quarterback, the first true freshman in the history of that rivalry playing in this game, and he played every bit of a true freshman. Michael Hawkins, 148 yards passing, but he tried running the ball 20 times and got 27 yards out of that, in addition to those 5 sacks they had against him. So, yeah, Texas legitimately deserves to be the number one team in the country. Oklahoma, well, they shouldn't even be in the rankings right now.
Yeah, probably not. But voters have a hard time, facing themselves in the mirror and admitting they're wrong. So they'll continue to vote teams in the top 25, even though most people believe they shouldn't be. That's the issue with voters all across the board in all sports. Caitlin Clark should have been unanimous, but Angel Reese got one. You got guys who should be in the Hall of Fame, but aren't. When different sports, this guy here has better numbers than 5 or 6 other guys at the same position, but because he didn't get along with the media, he's not in the Hall of Fame.
Exactly. The media and making themselves the story instead of the player, the subject. But going back to the rankings and all of that, man, I'm looking at these rankings. I'm saying there may be some bias. In fact, there is some bias. I know people have talked about the SEC bias and specific teams and probably cherry picking teams from big conferences, possibly like the Big Ten. But look at how things have lined up. We're talking about, 2 games, 2 teams in particular, Alabama and Tennessee. Last week, we know the huge upset, probably the biggest upset this decade, when Alabama went out to Nashville and lost to Vanderbilt for the first time in 40 years. They lost. They fell in the rankings. They're right behind Miami at number 7. And then what ends up happening is they come home. This is a game I picked last Thursday. I'm thinking they're going to get their get back. They needed a team to really beat down and show that the previous week was a fluke, and they didn't do it. They end up having another scare. They probably should have lost that game at home, and at no point in that game did they dominate at all, and they stay at number 7. Why didn't they drop for just having another close game like other teams drop? Tennessee in particular, they're all coming off of a loss against Arkansas. They play this week against another unranked Florida team. They pull it off, and they fall down to 11, though, 3 spots. So this is the bias I'm talking about. They both should have dropped. Alabama should at least have dropped 1 spot, but they didn't drop at all because there's that bias out there, and I specifically think it may be an SEC bias.
It could be. I mean, for a lot of years now, the early season rankings don't really mean that much. It's when the official rankings come out. You want to be in the top. Well, before it was the top 4. Now it's the top 12. So that's what all this going to matter.
Yeah, but right now, those rankings that you have right now is also going to be put into the equation when they decide, when it really comes in, it's a real ranking system that's going to matter. The strength of schedule.
But does it really? Because Florida State was undefeated last year and they got screwed. I know they lost their quarterback, but the committee's going to do what it wants to do regardless.
I'm thinking now, but I also think with an eye on last season. But there are more teams to fumble with right now, and you still have some undefeated teams right now. Army and Navy, for the first time this season, are in the top 25. There are teams that are still undefeated or teams that are playing well that aren't in the top 25, and you have 2 lost SEC teams still in the top 25. LSU beat Ole Miss. Ole Miss is a 2-loss team now. They're in the top 25. So this
Michigan's
is what we
a
have.
2-loss team. They're in the top 25.
And they shouldn't be. But you know what? They're also playing tough teams. But regardless, and it should be a 3-loss team after we saw what happened in Minnesota a couple of weeks ago. But it's just
True.
They want the top.
They would have still had to go down and score.
Yeah, that's true too. But it's just the way things are playing out right now. It's supposed to be different, but I think having 12 teams in the playoffs now, I think that might have given them a little bit more room for error, because you can kind of make up for your mistake with more teams being involved, less complaining. But I'd like to see if these military academies continue to win, how that's going to work. I mean, you still have Army and Navy having to play one another. You still have Navy having to play Notre Dame. So that's going to actually have something to say as well, because Notre Dame is among the top 12 again, even after their sole loss against Northern Illinois earlier. They move up. They're still consistent, doing what they have to do to get back into the run. The only thing about them, they're one of those teams that can't win the division anyway because they're not in the conference. So they had a disadvantage to come into it. Losing to Northern Illinois didn't help the advantage, and here we are.